Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really intense broadcast from Sky News Australia. We're looking at the recent blacklisting of the Islamist group Hizb ut-Tahrir. Now, this is a fiery, complex debate, right? So our goal here is to step back and impartially unpack the whole thing, the arguments, the counter-arguments, and the legal friction laid out by the panel. Let's get into it. Here's how we're going to break this down today. First, the blacklisting legal battle. Second, clashing ideologies and contradictions. Third, terror versus hate group designations. Fourth, the double standard argument. And finally, we'll look at the reactions and political fallout. Okay, starting with Section 1, the blacklisting legal battle. So the whole catalyst for this news segment was the Australian government officially blacklisting the group under new laws. And, well, the group pushed back hard. According to the broadcast, Hizb ut-Tahrir publicly rejected being labeled a hate group, literally stating they are seriously considering taking the matter to court to challenge the constitutional legality of the move. It's this specific threat of legal action that really fired up the Sky News panel. And right away, that legal threat prompts the hosts to start digging into the group's core philosophy. The commentators start actively hunting for inconsistencies in Hizb ut-Tahrir's public statements, kind of setting the stage for a much deeper dive into what the group is actually advocating for. Which leads us right into Section 2, clashing ideologies and contradictions. Let's see how this builds into a clash of philosophies. The panel zeroes in on a very specific statement from the group. They stated that Islam is the solution to the, quote, malaise of secular liberalism, which has failed humanity miserably. Now, because secular liberalism is basically the foundational bedrock of Australian society, the hosts highlight this as a fundamental, direct rejection of the country's entire way of life. And here is where the commentators spot what they see as a massive contradiction. On the one hand, the group is out there reassuring the public, saying, hey, we don't seek to change the system of government. But at the exact same time, they're loudly advocating for the establishment of a caliphate and Sharia law in exclusive Muslim countries. The hosts aggressively push back on this logic. They're asking, if you truly have no interest in changing the Australian government, why are you protesting and agitating here in a Western liberal democracy for foreign laws? To the panel, this behavior doesn't make any sense, and they argue it only serves to create deep disharmony within the country. All of this ideological friction brings us to Section 3, terror versus hate group designations. This is a crucial legal distinction debated by the panel. When you look at this on a global scale, there's a pretty stark divide. The UK officially designates them as a terror group, but Australia? Currently, they just list them as a hate group. That said, the political coalition in Australia is pushing really hard to get that upgraded to a full terror group designation. To justify that push for a terror group upgrade, the panel points to some very specific activities. Primarily, they highlight that Hizb ut-Tahrir was responsible for organizing highly controversial protests right after the October 7th massacre. And those protests included rhetoric that the panel found absolutely alarming. So you might be wondering, why haven't they been officially labeled a terror group in Australia yet? Well, the broadcast quotes the head of ASIO, Mike Burgess, to explain exactly that. He points out the group's incredibly calculated strategy. He says they're very clever, they know exactly what they're doing, and they deliberately toe the legal line, going right up to the edge of what is acceptable. And then they just stop. Moving right along to Section 4, the double standard argument. Even with ASIO saying they're walking this fine legal line, Hizb ut-Tahrir claims they are actually the victims of unfair targeting. They explicitly argued that these new hate speech laws are being disproportionately applied to pro-Palestinian and Muslim activists. They even pointed to the neo-Nazi presence at the March for Australia, basically implying that right-wing extremists get a pass while Muslim activists get banned. But the broadcast forcefully shuts that claim down using a simple historical timeline. They point out that under these exact same new hate speech laws, the neo-Nazi group, the National Socialist Network, was actually the very first to be banned. Hizb ut-Tahrir was second. Because of that undeniable timing, one commentator sharply criticizes the group's complaint as straight-up delusional. The panel's argument is that the double standard Hizb ut-Tahrir is complaining about just isn't historically accurate based on what the government actually did. They frame the whole complaint as a persistent victimhood narrative. That brings us to our final part, Section 5, reactions and political fallout. Looking beyond the legal arguments, let's see how the wider community responded. The panel notes that when Hizb ut-Tahrir put out a public call for support against the ban, it kind of backfired.
Major mainstream Muslim groups like the Lebanese Muslim Association entirely distanced themselves. On top of that, the broadcast alleges the group actually inflated their petition of support by deceptively listing individual branches of the exact same organizations separately.
The commentators lean heavily into this lack of mainstream support. By highlighting that major Muslim organizations wouldn't touch them with a barge pole, the panel is clearly framing Hizb ut-Tahrir as an isolated, fringe element with virtually zero backing from the broader Muslim community in Australia. In their defense, the group tried a bit of deflection, asking why right-wing politician Pauline Hanson isn't subjected to the same bans. And according to the broadcast, this attempt led to a deeply ironic observation from the Sky News panel about political symbiosis.
The hosts conclude that, ironically, Hizb ut-Tahrir is basically Pauline Hanson's greatest political weapon. By claiming to speak for all Muslims while pushing these really fringe views, the panel argues that Hizb ut-Tahrir actually validates the talking points of right-wing parties, actively boosting their political ratings.
So what does this all mean for us? The crucial question we're left to ponder from this explainer is this: do these legal bans actually quiet the noise and protect the public? Or do they just turn up the volume, inadvertently feeding into a cycle of polarization that fuels political extremes on all sides? It's a complex question, for sure. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.